All right, everyone, welcome to the Tonto's Demise Week 11 recap. Closing in on Thanksgiving real fast here. Only 2 weeks left in the regular season. We had a lot of low to middling scores this week, except for a couple. So all the guys at the top who have pretty much been cleaning up all year long. I thought for a moment that maybe Brian had the highest score of the year this week, but I was incorrect. And Justin, you can actually not feel too bad about this loss because you actually did maintain the highest score of the season by a half of a point. Went back and looked at week 1, and I believe you actually had 233.95. And Brian this week had 233.45. So you actually, even in defeat, you actually held on. You clinched a playoff spot, according to Yahoo, and you actually held on to the highest score of the season. Only 2 weeks left for somebody to maybe take that down, but 233 is a pretty high score. Unlikely that that'll happen. So there's something to hang your hat on. Like I said, pretty much all the other scores, except for the top couple of people, were right in the 140 to 160 range. 140, yeah. Already between that 20 point threshold there, 140 to 160, pretty much everybody was in there. Except for friggin' Laser Sharks, who were under 100. I should have checked to see if this was the lowest score of the week or of the season. I could probably just scroll through here real quick and tell you, because I think we only had one other team go under 100. Friggin' Laser Sharks, you only had 97 a couple weeks ago, so you actually bested that total in the wrong direction. And I want to say Possum Magic had a week below 100 here somewhere. Let's see. Possum Magic actually had 91.2 in week 2. So that was the lowest score of the year. So, Kevin, you actually didn't have the lowest score of the season. But you came pretty close. And you actually saved, at least temporarily, saved the season for the Isotopes, because they would have lost to pretty much every other team this week, except for you and the Mighty Midgets, and would have been eliminated from playoff contention as well. Still holding on here for hope, as we have we have 4 teams. Yahoo has them clinched for playoff spots. That's Josh, Detling, Brian, and Justin. And like I've been saying for a couple weeks now, I think the last 2 playoff spots, we've got pretty much everybody else fighting for those spots. I think we can safely say that Kevin and Jim are out. They are both 3 and 8. But currently the 5 and 6 playoff seeds are being held by teams that are 5 and 6. Bad Luck Bears and Disco. Right on their tail, though, only one game behind, is the Isotopes, the Bad Luck Wolf Bears, Possum Magic, and Gags to Riches. So with only one, if any of those teams can win the rest of their games, the last 2, and have either the Bad Luck Bears or Disco lose one, somebody could sneak that last playoff spot there. It looks like, assuming the Bad Luck Bears and Disco, if they both win their last 2 matchups, they're definitely in, because that would give each of them 7 wins, and that's more than possible for the teams that are 7 and below. But if either team goes 1 and 1, or 0-2 over the last 2 weeks. One of these teams that's 4-7 could move up and squeak that last playoff spot. Although it's not looking good for Possum and Gags because they are about 100 points or so behind Disco, and looks like Possum is actually 200 points behind the Bad Luck Bears, and both of you guys are 200 points behind Jay and about 100 points behind Disco. So even if you can win both of your matchups and have Disco or Bad Luck Bears lose one, you still might not be able to make it because of your low point total. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch over these last 2 weeks. Maybe at the end here, after recapping the matchups, we'll look ahead and see what the matchups are coming up here in Week 12 and see how they're going to play out in terms of shaping up these last 2 playoff spots. So that's enough of rambling about this past week. Let's get into it with the first matchup, which was quite an interesting one, as the defending champ from Gags to Riches holds off from playoff elimination for one more week, much to the chagrin of the Bad Luck Wolf Bears, who, and let me take a quick look at this, because I believe the Bad Luck Wolf Bears have an L5 in their streak category on Yahoo here. So I believe the New Gods Mad Titans, now Bad Luck Bears, were 4-2 at one point, and over the second half of the season, they have not won at all, lost 5 in a row, and are now sitting at 4-7. And this one was probably the most painful one of all things considered, as the Bad Luck Bears, Wolf Bears, were trying to hold on and keep pace for one of those last playoff spots. Although you're both still in there. I said Gags probably not going to be able to do it, but Bad Luck Wolf Bears definitely still in there with a high point total. But this one, and I checked to see if there was any stat corrections. Nothing's happened that I'm aware of so far. But unfortunately for Jimmy, Gags to Riches absolutely squeaks this one out. The final score, 148.75 to 148.2. So a 0.55 difference in this matchup. So all sorts of things could have happened differently that could have swung this matchup in favor of the Wolf Bears. Carson Wentz only completed 14 passes. If he has 15, you win. All sorts of things here. Then the 75-yard touchdown to Rashard Matthews. If you had started Marcus Mariota, actually, despite his 4 interceptions, he actually outscored Wentz this week. But that's easy. It's easy to sit here and say that in hindsight, knowing what the scores are, what they would have. I mean, how do you not start Carson Wentz against Dallas in a great matchup? But man, they just ran the ball down the throats of the Cowboys there, and he hardly needed to throw any passes in this game. But if he had completed one more, that would have been a difference. But again, also you could argue that long touchdown, the 3-point bonus there, was the difference maker because, even despite that, Mariota scored 3 more points than Wentz did. Plus, you would have gotten the 3 for the long touchdown, which Yahoo does not count those. We always have to add those in. But anyway, I could talk about all the different things that could have gone on in this matchup for an hour. But let's just get right down to the matchup, what the actual rosters were, instead of me just rambling on some more about it. Gags to Riches here. He had Drew Brees, 56.5. Receivers, Dez Bryant, Devontae Adams, and Cooper Kupp. Bryant, 14.5. Adams, 20.5. And Kupp, 10.5. So Devontae Adams has been the only productive wide receiver for Green Bay since Aaron Rodgers went down with that injury. Be interesting to see what happens with Cooper Kupp now that Robert Woods is going to be out for a couple weeks. Even though, said Gags, you're probably just playing spoiler at this point. But I think you have a matchup this week that could come through for you in terms of that spoiler factor there. Your running backs, Adrian Peterson and Doug Martin. Looks like Peterson 2.5, Doug Martin just under 4. Tight end was Ben Watson. He only had 1 catch, a 33-yarder, so 4.3. And again, Rashard Matthews, you had him in the flex. 22, would have been 25.5 with that long touchdown bonus. Your kicker only got 1 point, Zerline from the Rams, and you went with the Arizona Cardinals defense. Looks like they had a couple turnovers, a sack, but they lost the game, gave up a lot of points, a lot of yards to it. Yahoo says 7. Not sure exactly what the total was, but it was probably 10 or 13, somewhere in that ballpark. As for bad luck Wolf Bears, Carson Wentz, 35.7. Your 3 receivers, Emmanuel Sanders, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Michael Crabtree. Sanders, only 3.5. Schuster, only 8.5. And Crabtree, 13.1. Your running backs, you had C.J. Anderson and Melvin Gordon. Looks like Anderson had a touchdown, but he lost a fumble. Had not too many receiving or rushing yards. They're only 37. So that looks like about 7.7 once you take off that fumble. Gordon looks like 80 yards and a touchdown, so an even 14. Tight end, you had Vernon Davis, 9.7. In the flex, of course, Le'Veon Bell, 19.3. Not too bad, but again, outscored by Rashard Matthews in that Thursday night game. And then Boswell, the kicker, who is frequently mentioned, do not ever touch him by the podcasters. Although you have to, that was last year, and maybe the year before. But let's face it, the Steelers are not going for 2-point conversions all the time anymore. They are kicking a lot of field goals and a lot of extra points. Boswell actually had 17 according to Yahoo, and it was probably closer to 18.5 once you add on the fractions there. And then the Green Bay defense, even though Green Bay got shut out, they actually did okay. They had a couple sacks, a turnover, and their yardage and they didn't give up. I think you got some points for first downs, points for yardage, running yards allowed. I think you got maybe 6 for that. Maybe it might have been 6 for passing yards too. They did fairly good, but it was just not quite enough to get the win this week. So it's easy to look back and say, well, I should have done this, should have done that. But said you kept Houston's defense on the bench. That might have been a mistake going up against Arizona, who was starting Blaine Gabbert for the first time. That might have been a matchup to maybe try and take advantage of. But then again, they've been doing poorly all season long too. Their defense hasn't been. After losing J.J. Watt, they've been giving up a lot of points. So it was really a coin toss here on which defense to play, but Green Bay hasn't been doing very well either. So, all right, stop. I'll make myself stop, because like I said, I could sit here and nitpick this matchup and all the things that could have been different for another hour, and I've already been talking for like 8 minutes about this. Just this one matchup. Anyway, so both of these teams, you are now 4-7. Jimmy is in 8th place. Gags is in 10th place. Jimmy still with an outside shot at the playoffs. Probably has to win both of his matchups. And Gags said you have a low point total, and unless something crazy can happen, you're probably not going to be able to pull through. Let's see. Next matchup. Go right down the line. Said I mentioned this in the beginning here about the low point total. We had Skellahor Isotopes against friggin' Laser Sharks. And the Isotopes get the win here. 143.25 to 96.65. Thanks to Dak Prescott. 4 turnovers, only 15, just over 15 points from him. That was probably one of the biggest factors there. I was definitely worried about your Eagles going into that game on Sunday night, but said they controlled that game pretty much from the start. It was shaping up to be a game where Dak Prescott could end up just piling up garbage time fantasy points. But the Eagles defense never really let down that entire game. They were able to, the Eagles are pretty much able to run all over Dallas with Ajayi, LeGarrette Blount, Clement, and whoever else they have. And again, said both of these teams needed to get this win to hold on to their playoff hope. And so the friggin' Laser Sharks does the Isis Hopes a huge favor this week because, like I said, with 143.25, that actually would have only beaten the Laser Sharks and the Mighty Midgets. So, some good luck finally for the Isis Hopes for this season. At least for 1 week, we can hold on to a little glimmer of hope. And let's see, the Isis Hopes had Derek Carr, who, is it just me when I watch the Raiders play on TV? Why does Derek Carr always look like he's wearing like black eyeliner or something? He looks like the singer from Green Day like 10 years ago. Whenever it looks like he's wearing just a little bit. I don't know. Is he like emo goth football player? Maybe it's my eyes playing tricks on me. But his eyes always look like they're dark around like he's wearing some kind of eyeliner or something. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe it's my imagination. But anyway, Derek Carr had just under 43. Larry Fitzgerald, 24. Stephon Diggs, a little bit over 7. Tyreek Hill, 13.8. Running backs were Tevin Coleman and Rod Smith from the Cowboys. Coleman filling in for an injured Devontae Freeman. He had 40 yards and a touchdown. And Rod Smith filling in for the suspended Ezekiel Elliott. Definitely did not look nearly as good as Alfred Morris this week. He only had 11 yards, so 1 point there. So only about, 11 points from 11.5 from your 2 running backs. Gronk only 6.5. Todd Gurley only 14.5. Let's see, Prater field goal, and he had a 150-yard field goal. Looks like he had a short one too, and a couple of PATs. Yahoo says 10. And then the Chiefs defense losing to the New York Giants in overtime. Let's see, 12-9. Yahoo says 9. I think that was actually the correct score. They only had 1 turnover. Actually, it might have been a little bit more because I'm not sure. The yardage might have been, I think, was kind of low, but I think the scoring might have been a little bit different than what Yahoo's default scoring is. But anyway, it was still a pretty low score. Surprising to see the Kansas City Chiefs there, who have been on the skids these last couple weeks. I think they've lost, ever since that Steelers game, they've lost like 4 out of 5. I think they were 5-0 when they played the Steelers, and ever since then they are 4-5. Or no, sorry, they're 1-4 or something like that. Like lost 4 out of 5, something like that. Which is unusual, I think, because they always say Andy Reid always is great coming off of a bye, or he has such a great record of always winning coming out of the bye. And you're playing the Giants, who are reeling. Eli can be a turnover machine, so that was a real disappointment. But I can't complain because still got the win over friggin' Laser Sharks. Like I said, Dak Prescott, 15.25. Your 3 receivers were Marquise Lee, Mike Evans, and Nelson Aguilar. Lee, 9.5. Evans, 14.2. And Aguilar actually less than 1 because his only catch was for -2 yards. So you only got 0.8 from him. Your two running backs were Darkwa and Crowell. Darkwa, 75 yards and a touchdown, but Crowell only 18 yards. Zach Ertz, 2 catches, but only 8 yards. And your best play here was Ingram. He was over 100 yards, touchdown, a couple catches, 27.5 points from him. Your kicker was Suckup from the Titans. I believe his total was about 5.4, something like that. And then Tennessee Titans defense, they gave up a ton of points, ton of yardage. They had a couple sacks, but you lost. I believe Yahoo says 3. But actually, I think the Steelers' rushing yard total was actually kind of low. So you actually were at 0, but that bounced you back up to 6, thanks to the low rushing total there from the Steelers. But still, not good scores pretty much everywhere. When your quarterback goes for 15, really not much you can do. Talk about, one of the biggest, I think, some of the biggest hype going into this season, and maybe the biggest bust of the year, has got to be Mike Evans going, I think he was, 4th overall in the draft this year. He's gone over 20 only 2 times this year. He's been in the teens a couple times, but said 14.2 this week. That is, right in the middle range of some of his highest scores. He's only had 2 weeks where his highest score is 22.3, and that was in week 1. So it's kind of been all over the map from there. Couple single-digit scores, said low teens. I think the potential that he showed last year, Jameis Winston was force-feeding him the ball. He was putting up huge numbers. I think big expectations for him going into this year. I know I wanted him in the first round of the draft. I think Bigler wanted him. A couple people were hoping he might slide down a little bit, and said Gags took him higher than I think the rest of us thought that he might go, because the hype train must have been really going on him there, and Gags took him, I believe. It was 4th overall. Traded him away after not too long. And that has been mostly a disservice to Kevin this year, as Winston has been really hit or miss, mostly a disappointment. And now he was trying to play through an injury, and now he has been on the bench for a while. And you've been going with Prescott, who's actually been doing fairly well. The first couple of games of the season he was doing pretty well, but now he's kind of trailed off. He had a 50-pointer in week 9, but other than that, he's sandwiched in between that. That 50-pointer is sandwiched between a 22 and a 35-pointer, and then 15 this week. So he's been cold the past couple of weeks here, and said you don't have Jameis Winston because they've been sitting him now for a little bit, trying to get him healthy again. Even though he was pretty hit or miss, he had a couple big scores. He was over 50 a couple times, over 60 once there, I see. And I think there was a week where he got the week that he actually got hurt. Fitzpatrick went in and put up some big numbers for you there in relief. But after that injury, they played him, but he was never quite the same here, which I'm not sure. I'm not going to take the time right now to go back and look and see which weeks you've actually used Winston or Prescott here. But anyway, with this win, the Isotopes move up to 4-7. They actually jump all the way up to 7th place, just outside the playoff window. And friggin' Laser Sharks drop to 3-8, all the way down to 11th place. And I think it's fair to say that friggin' Laser Sharks, come this week on the podcast, we will be clapping you out. Next up, the Bad Luck Bears versus Space Antelope, the Huber Squasher, going against one of the Hubers. Anyway, and the Huber squasher squashes the Huber. It's true. That's what happened. I'm just reporting the facts. 190.3 for Space Antelope, and Bad Luck Bears 146.45 for Antelope. Said to get up to 90, had some pretty big scores here. Kirk Cousins 55, Doug Baldwin, Jordy Nelson, and Amendola were your receivers. Baldwin 12, Nelson 4.5, and Amendola, actually a high score there, 20.5 for him. Thanks to, he had 8 catches and a touchdown. Your running backs, Latavius Murray and Kenyon Drake. Looks like Drake only had 4 yards, but Murray he was actually just under 100 and also 2 touchdowns. So pretty much all your points came from Murray there. But let's see, that would be about 21, 22 points total from those 2 guys. And that's basically carried by Murray, but that's not too bad. Tight end, you had Evan Engram. Surprisingly, he only had 1 catch. The Chiefs defense must have been focusing on taking him entirely out of the game. He was 1 for 9, so that game was pretty much all field goals. And then Kelsey, you had him in the flex. He was over 100 yards on 8 catches, but he actually threw an interception. So you lost 3 points for that. Even if he had not been in the flex, you lose points for turnovers committed by your players. So an interception thrown by anybody is -3, no matter what spot they are in. Just a reminder to everybody on that. Your kicker, Tucker from Baltimore, and your defense was Baltimore. Looks like Tucker had 3 field goals, a couple PATs, and then biggest factor here was Baltimore defense, who I think we remember week 2 or 3, they were absolutely embarrassed you in that, was it the London game? Did they play Jacksonville? Was that Baltimore and Jacksonville in that game? But I think they got shut out and blown out by 40, it was like 40-0 or something like that. And I believe that was the first matchup this year where a defense scored -3, which has actually happened a couple times now. But Baltimore, Yahoo says 36. I think I actually wrote it down here. It was 48 this week. 48 points from the Ravens defense. Getting another shutout. 6 sacks, bunch of turnovers. So good performance from them. Enough to get past. So you got, with that 48 and Kirk Cousins, you got over 100 points. About 105, maybe a little bit, something like that, from 48 and 54. So about, 102? Over 100 points from Cousins and the Ravens defense. Usually a total that will propel you to victory pretty much on most weeks there, because then the rest of your guys don't need to do a whole lot to get you up to about the 150, 160 range. For Bad Luck Bears, living up to his name again this week. Let's see, quarterback was Goff, only 35 points. Receivers, Julio Jones, Golden Tate, and Deshaun Jackson. Julio, 12, Tate, 6, and Jackson, just under 11. Fournette and Jamal Charles you went with at running back. Fournette, no touchdowns, but he got over 100 yards, so 14 points from him. And Charles only had 7 yards. Jimmy Graham, your tight end, let's see. He had 7 catches, including a touchdown. He was just under 21. And then you had Sanu in the flex, since there was no Devontae Freeman this week. He only had 3 for 30, but he did catch a touchdown. 12.7 points there. Your kicker for the Eagles, looks like he missed a field goal and made a PAT, but then went out with an injury. So he actually got you 0. And you went with the Tampa Bay defense this week in a surprisingly good matchup. You went against your Seattle Seahawks, which turned out to be the right call, even though they were at home against Atlanta. Seattle looks like they might not be quite the defense that they've been. They've suffered some injuries to some of their best players. So even though Atlanta wasn't really able to run the ball too much on them, but they said they gave up a lot of points and it wasn't too good. I think that Russell Wilson did everything he possibly could to try to bring them back in that game. But you play Tampa Bay's defense. They actually, Yahoo says 28. They had a touchdown, 3 interceptions, didn't give up a whole lot of points. I think Jay Cutler got hurt, and Matt Moore came into play. I think Matt Moore actually did pretty good. I didn't write this one down on the defensive score there, but it ended up being the right move for you. But it was not enough. Like I said, that Wings team got over 100 from just Cousins and Baltimore, and that's going to be a tough combo to get past each week, pretty much any week. So you get a couple guys only scoring in the single digits there, or in the low teens there. So, and your quarterback score only 35. You're always hoping to get a little bit more than that. You're hoping for at least 40 to 45 is what you're always hoping for. If anything more than 50 is just a bonus, really. But not enough this week. But you're still doing okay in terms of positioning. Space Antelope, he moves to 8-3. He is in 3rd place. And like I said, Bad Luck Bears, though, you are 5-6, 5-6, but you are in 5th place. So not too bad. Let's see. Next matchup. Talked about this one too before. For the highest score, was close to the highest score of the year, as FC Bohoric perhaps gets a taste of his own medicine, coming back around. As Hillbillies on PCP put a double hondo down on FC Bohoric. The score 233.45 to 156.75. Let's see. Hillbillies on PCP. We had Phillip Rivers, 40.5. Demaryius Thomas, 17.5. Antonio Brown, 42.5. Your highest, outscoring your quarterback. Actually, Keenan Allen outscored his own quarterback. But we'll get to that in a minute. Devontae Parker, 6.5. LaShawn McCoy and Jordan Howard, your 2 running backs. And you get McCaffrey back after this week, or going into this week. I'm sorry. McCoy, Howard, and McCaffrey. Ugh, it's disgusting to have to know that you and Antonio Brown. I know. I mean, even if I squeak into the playoffs, you can't feel good about going up against this lineup right now. McCoy, 2 touchdowns, 1 receiving, 1 rushing, over 100 yards rushing. Howard, over 100 yards rushing and a touchdown. So, let's see, 14 and 12, 26.5 for McCoy, and that would be 21.5 for Howard. So anytime you're getting 20-some points from each of your running backs, that's tough to overcome as an opponent. Tight end Delaney Walker, a little bit over 15. You're in the flex. You went with Thielen this week because you got a surplus of wide receivers as well, and Thielen has just been on fire all year long. I think I said this before. Just about everything Brian has touched this year has turned to gold. Whether it be some guys in the draft like McCaffrey, trading for McCoy. Who else did you get? You got Zeke for next year or possibly the end of this season. Let's see. I mean, Antonio Brown has been great all year long, pretty much. So the Denver defense started out really great, but I don't know what happened to them. They've really trailed off. But Detroit has been doing okay. You picked them up off the waiver wire. Like I said, I still think, I think I said before that Hillbillies on PCP have to be the favorite to win this year. That said, I don't totally agree with that anymore, but it's hard to pick against it right now. And I'll get into that. I'll get back into that hopefully if I remember here in the future matchups. For FC Bahorik, well, did I finish? I was talking about Adam Thielen. He had 6 catches, including a exactly 65-yard touchdown. So you got a bonus for that. Kicker, Lutz from the Saints. Speaking of people turning to gold, he looks like he had 4 field goals. Yahoo says 15. He's been in that area, 10 to 15 pretty much every single week. Detroit defense, they had a touchdown, a couple turnovers, did okay against the Bears. They won the game. Yahoo says 13. It's probably a little bit more than that, but not enough to get past Hillbillies here for FC Bahorik. Despite I said Keenan Allen, who scored more points than Phillip Rivers and Antonio Brown, just happened to be on FC Bahorik, who you thought, oh, Antonio Brown just scored 42 points. There's no way that FC Bahorik's wide receivers are going to come in. They might not even get that all complete. Antonio Brown might outscore all 3 of them by himself. However, Keenan Allen goes off for 43.5 and actually, as the wide receiver, outscored his own quarterback by 3 points, 2.5, something like that. Let's see, for FC Bahorik, Matt Ryan, 38 points, which I believe is the total we've pretty much penciled him in for every week, and he has managed to live up to it once again. Receivers, again, Keenan Allen, A.J. Green, and Alshon Jeffrey. A.J. scored a touchdown, Jeffrey scored a touchdown. Looks like Green had 15, and Jeffrey was 18.5. Keenan Allen, again, 43.2. Then your running backs, Dion Lewis and Kareem Hunt. Hunt, who has just gone ice cold the past couple weeks, along with the entire Chiefs team, as they said they've lost 4 of their last 5, not doing too well. He only had 70 yards, no touchdowns. I don't think he's had. I see no touchdowns. He scored touchdowns his first 3 weeks, and then he had no touchdowns, but over 100 yards, weeks 4 and 5. But I see he has been under 100 and no touchdowns every week since that. Well, including the Steelers game, and every week since then, which was week 6, whenever they played the Steelers there. So that Hunt has gone ice cold for you. Only 7 points here. Lewis, only 60 rushing yards, but he did catch a touchdown. So you got 12 from him. Cameron Brate, speaking of guys going ice cold, 2.2. Rex Burkhead in the flex. So you started 2 New England running backs. He had 4 for 20. And let's see. 16 rushing yards. So he actually, no touchdowns from him. You might have been better off. He actually probably would have been better off, I think, flexing Lewis and not Burkhead. But, I mean, you can say that now, but going into the matchup, it could go. You never know what's going to happen with those guys. So who knows what will happen. Especially, it'll be interesting to see next year. It probably wouldn't, and I probably shouldn't say this because but I'm sure nobody will remember. But Detling will probably remember. He won't listen to this, but Brian will probably mention it to him, and then he'll remember for next year that it probably wouldn't be the best idea, but it wouldn't be terrible to just draft all Patriots running backs next year. So if you had Burkhead, Lewis, and James White, just start all 3 of them every week because they're all going to be out there catching little dump-off passes. Let's see. Then your kicker was Hauschka from the Buffalo Bills, who got blown out by the Chargers he had one long field goal, a couple PATs in garbage time there. And the Saints defense, only 2 sacks, but they came back and won that game, but they gave up a ton of yards, ton of points there. Yahoo says 2. It was maybe 6 or 7, something like that. But that's still a decent score for FC Bohoric. Even in defeat, I believe you clinched a. I don't think the clinching little asterisk there was on your name before, but it's there now. So it said even in defeat, you've clinched a playoff spot. You're 7-4. So said all you gotta do is make it. You're still chasing Hillbillies and Shawshank there for a bye week, but it's not looking good because you would have to win both of your matchups, your last 2, and Brian would have to lose both of his, which isn't looking too good considering Brian would have to double his loss total on the whole season there to get to 4 losses there. But all you have to do is get in. That's what I always say, and it's absolutely true. You're in the playoffs, so we'll see what happens from there. Hillbillies on PCP. He moves to 9-2. He is in second place. And by the way, you would have absolutely crushed Jay in the knockout pool finale if you guys had manned up and not split the pot and one of you taken it the way it's supposed to be. But anyway, so yeah, Brian, you would have absolutely destroyed and embarrassed Jay in the final of the knockout pool. But you're both, I guess, in your eyes, you're both winners. So that's all that really matters, right? Excuse me. All right, enough with this one. 2 matchups left. We had Disco versus Mighty Midgets. Excuse me. I'm all phlegmy for some reason here. Hopefully Justin hasn't given me a cold a week after, a week later. Anyway, excuse me. Anyway, sorry. Disco 158.65 to the Mighty Midgets 139.7. Mighty Midgets were trying to hold on, keep his faint hope of playoffs alive, but Disco says, I don't think so. Gives you that 8th defeat, and you join friggin' Laser Sharks as most. Suffice to say that you are going to be clapped out this week. Disco holding on for that win, keeping his playoff chances alive. He had Stafford quarterback. Let's see, just over 42. Your receivers were Michael Thomas, Amari Cooper, and Jarvis Landry. Thomas 15, Cooper 11.8, and Jarvis 19.5. Pretty good there. Running backs, he picked up and played Jamal Williams from the Packers since Montgomery and Aaron Jones were both down. I think, was Montgomery definitely out? I think so, huh? But said he had a tough matchup against Baltimore. Only got you 5.5 points, no touchdowns or anything. As you know, they were shut out. And then your other running back was McKissick from the Seahawks. He had 30 yards, so 3 points. Tight end Fedorowicz from Houston, 3.8. James White in your flex, only 13 rushing yards. Surprisingly, no catches for him. That's a highly unusual outcome for James White there. No, it said only rushing yards, no catches. I'm not sure if he's found his way into the Belichick doghouse or what there, but that's a surprising total. Gostowski, couple field goals, a couple PATs, including a 62, 63-yard field goal in the altitude of Mexico City there. So Yahoo doesn't score that high on kicks, on field goal kicks. So you actually, according to Yahoo, you only got 5 points for that 62-yard field goal. So I actually had to tack on 1.5 points to your score there, in addition to the other fractional points there for your field goal kicker. And then Steelers defense, they had 5 sacks, 4 turnovers, did pretty good. Yahoo says 26. I did not write it down, but they were probably close to 35 or 40, something like that. I believe they might have been said a lot of I think I said this before. A lot of times, 9 is the total that ends up getting tacked on to the defensive score. And I think that might have been it. So maybe it was 35. That sounds about right. Because I think the Titans actually did okay on yardage. They had that 75-yard touchdown. Mariota actually did okay, but it was all the turnovers. And, well, as for Mighty Midgets, though, he did not have Cam or Funchess this week. They were on bye, so you had to go with Andy Dalton, and you picked up and played, what's his name, Keelan Cole from the Jaguars, since who was missing? Was Hearns out? I'm not even sure who their other big wide receiver. They don't have a big wide receiver, but whoever was out. I haven't. Jacksonville's defense is so bad outside of Fournette that I haven't really paid much attention. I can't remember offhand. But you said you went with Dalton. He only got 35. Well, still that's not too bad. 35. Cooks, big game from him. Almost 150 yards and a touchdown. He was just under 27. You played Jamison Crowder this week, who was your keeper. Been surprisingly a big disappointment this year, but actually did okay this week. 7 for 72, 14.5 points. One of the only times this year that he's gone over, gone into double digits this year. He's been in single digits all but 3 weeks. So that's a big disappointment there. It's strange, though, because even though Kirk Cousins has been putting up 50, 60 pointers, about 55 points, like clockwork pretty much every week, but how are his receivers aren't doing anything. Said Crowder has been a disappointment. Vernon Davis has actually been kind of a bright spot. Jordan Reed, pretty much a lost year. Said, how is he? Terrell Pryor, done next to nothing. Said, how is Kirk Cousins having such a good year? It's because all they do is dump passes to Chris Thompson and the running backs. But now Thompson is gone, so that's going to be interesting to see how they adapt to that. I think there was talk that they were going to pick up Andre Ellington, who was released from Arizona, but I believe he was picked up by the Texans to replace another guy who went down this week on the Midgets, which was D'Onta Foreman, I think, which I felt really bad watching the highlight of because he got hurt on the same play that he ran like a 40, 45-yard touchdown. And pretty much as soon as he crossed the goal line, he ruptured his Achilles. And as soon as he was about to start celebrating, he just grabs his leg and falls down to the ground and is writhing in pain at a time when he should be celebrating. So it's actually, said I feel bad kind of laughing about it, but it's not, said it isn't funny, but it kind of was. But I feel bad. I do feel bad for the guy. He was someone who has been worth keeping an eye on all year long and thinking about for next year, but now that's going to be a little bit tricky. Said coming off an injury like that, we'll see what happens with him next year. So your running backs, you went for, said you actually see what Foreman did before he went out. Oh, he actually had 2 touchdowns. He had 60 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he actually would have been a good play despite that injury. You went with Abdullah and Derrick Henry. Abdullah only had 22 yards, but he caught a touchdown. And Henry only had 32 yards. Tight end was Kyle Rudolph, 10.8. Kamara in the flex, money in the bank every week, 25.5. Kicker was not Martavis. It wasn't Martavis Bryant. It was Matt Bryant. It would be a lot more interesting, though, if it had been Martavis Bryant, don't you think? He had a couple field goals, 4 PATs. Yahoo says 10. I think it was a little bit more, like 11. This matchup, it didn't come down to Monday night, but each of you had a player. Mighty Midgets had Bryant, and Disco had McKissick. But the difference was about 25 points there. So it would have taken a Herculean effort by Matt Bryant. He would have had to kick about 10 field goals, and McKissic would have had to done absolutely nothing for Mighty Midgets to somehow squeak this one out. But I should get to, speaking of changing the outcomes of this matchup, Mighty Midgets went with the Buffalo Bills defense this week, who, and I did actually put this down, they scored 0 was their actual total. I think because they had, they had 1 sack and they lost, you had 1, minus, maybe it was 1. Try to think how they would have gained 2 points there. Because maybe it was 1. I'll have to go back and figure that out. Just looking at it real quickly here. I don't know how. So 1 minus 3 for the loss will take you back to minus 2. I'm not sure how you would have gotten back to 0. You would have gained 2 points back. I'll have to go back. Maybe it was 1, so maybe I have your score off by a point there. I'll have to go back and check that out. But anyway, said you only got 0 or 1 there from your defense. A 30-some point difference in a matchup that was 20-point difference here. So that was tough pill to swallow. Your other defense was the Redskins. You can't play them against the... it's tough to play your defense against the New Orleans Saints, especially right now, the way they are playing. So can't feel too bad about that. At least Disco didn't play the Chiefs defense, or not the Chiefs, the Chargers defense, because they had 5 interceptions, 2 touchdowns. They gave up a lot of garbage time points and yards, but so that could have been. I haven't actually figured out what the Chargers' score would have been, but it would have been pretty good either way. So enough for Disco to get the win. Man, I'm 52 minutes already. He moves to 5-6, so he is in 6th place, still in play. As of right now, he is in the playoffs. And Mighty Midgets, you are in 12th place. Might be wearing that Rivers jersey next year. We'll see what happens these last 2 weeks. But you are 3-8, joining friggin' Laser Sharks as already looking ahead to 2018. Unless you can play a little bit of a spoiler here in these last 2 weeks. And finally, we had Shawshank Athletics holding on to first place, defeating Possum Magic 185.45 to 154.4. I think Possum Magic was actually below 100 points until Monday night when he only had Russell Wilson left to go. Fortunately, Russell Wilson made it a game for you. He scored about more than a third of your points just by himself there. 58.5, pretty good. But for Shawshank Athletics, as we know, he had Tom Brady, 30 completions, over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, 62 points for him. And I think I mentioned this already on the lineup, the Jacksonville Jaguars defense. Yahoo says 32. But it makes me sick to my stomach to say these numbers every single week. But 56 for the Jaguars defense. So what is that? 62 and 56 is what, like 117, 118 points just from your quarterback and defense. It's been like that most weeks of this season, and I mentioned it, said I was going to get back to it, talking about who might be the favorite for this season. And if it hadn't been for a couple, Shawshank suffered some serious injuries that could really affect him going down the line here. But if it hadn't been for that, I would have to say that Josh, maybe he's not quite the favorite this year because Brian's team is pretty loaded. But between Brady and Jacksonville, I, I was saying this to Justin before. Like I just kind of feel like there are certain things each year that just go right for somebody and can carry them all the way through the year, I don't know, maybe all the way to the championship. And to be perfectly honest, I think this year it's the Jacksonville Jaguars defense. We all passed on them. I think they were a 12th or 13th round pick. And everybody had defenses and a bunch of some people probably had multiple defenses by the time the Jaguars defense was selected. And there was definitely some hype about them in the preseason going into the season. But it was still, I think, a pretty risky play. It's kind of like a prove it to me first kind of situation because there was so much hype around the Jaguars last year, and they certainly failed to live up to expectations. But there was just as much hype about their defense again this year and their offense. I think if Bortles could put it together, they've got the offense, the pieces to be to contend. I think every week, but again, just said Jacksonville's defense. They say it was a prove it to me first kind of situation, but sometimes you just got to take that gamble and hope that you get that lottery ticket and hope that it hits. And that Jacksonville's defense has hit in a big way this year, consistently. Maybe the best pick of the entire draft. And now he's getting, I said he lost a couple people. He's getting Olsen back, though. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens here. And between Brady and Jacksonville, you guys commented in the podcast, too. Said the bread on your sandwich there, and everything that's kind of filler in between. But it's tough seeing every week. Tom Brady, 50 points. Jacksonville's defense, 50 points. Said even Jacksonville's not doing 50 every week, but they've been putting up close to that. They've put up big numbers almost every single week on the Airsphere. So maybe Shawshank doesn't. Maybe he might not have the best team on paper right now, but I think if anyone deserves it this year, I would probably go with him simply for the fact that he took that gamble and it's paid off. And I said everybody else kind of passed up on it, and I said it was out there for everyone else, but Josh took it and he's run with it. And sometimes you just got to make those bold picks and hope that they pan out, and sometimes they do, and end up making you look like a genius. But anyway, should we run through the actual matchup here? Brady, 62. Your receivers, Kelvin Benjamin, only 3. I believe he hurt his knee again. It's been a problem all year long. I don't know if it was the knee that he already had a ACL tear on. I don't think so, but he had a knee injury earlier this year where didn't he catch a pass and was running and fell and grabbed his knee, and now basically again the same thing this week. So definitely he doesn't have an ACL tear or ACL damage, I see, according to the Yahoo updates here, but you got to be concerned about that. It looks like he's going to miss some time. Tough to see what you're going to do there. Hopkins still, despite Watson being gone, he's basically money in the bank. He's still been catching touchdowns. He was 17.5 this week. Robert Woods, who's been on fire again, 16 points for him, but he has some kind of shoulder injury, and they're saying that he's going to be out for a couple of weeks. So who knows what that's going to be. Hopefully, for your sake, you're hoping to have him back for playoff time. Assuming you have, I think it's safe to assume you're going to have a bye week there, Shawshank. So you really don't need him in the next 3 weeks. So maybe that'll be enough time for him to recover and come back for you in week 14 or week 15, I should say, at playoff time there when you're going to need them again. Your running backs, DeMarco Murray and Jay Ajayi. Murray, let's see, only 10 yards, and pretty much all of his points came from receiving, which we'll get to in a second here. Ajayi, no touchdowns, but he did have 90 yards, almost broke a huge touchdown run. I think they caught up to him around the 10 or 20 yard line, but it was like a 70-yard run. You had Austin Hooper, your tight end. He caught 2 passes, but he actually scored less than 2 because his 2 catches went for -1. And then again, Chris Thompson, out for the year. He had a receiving touchdown, broke his leg there, 10.5 points from him. But so the good news for you is Perrine looked pretty good. So you'll actually, I just said DeMarco Murray, most of his stats came from receiving. So you'll probably be more than happy to plug Murray down into the flex spot and Perrine up there into one of your running back spots. So based on the matchups, but those injuries could be a problem there at wide receiver because, well, you got Kenny Stills. He's quietly been on fire the past week or two. He's been okay. He's had 2 huge games and everything else kind of quiet. But your other receivers there don't really do too much. I think you have John Brown, you have Randall Cobb, you have Allen Hurns, and Benny Fowler. So it's going to be kind of tricky these next couple of weeks finding replacements for Benjamin and Woods. But like I said, you definitely are going to get a bye week. You're still trying to fight for that number 1 seed, but these injuries might not be serious, serious enough that they're not going to cost you the rest of the season. By the time you're going to need them in playoff time. They should hopefully be back to ready to go there for you. Boston Magic said again, Russell Wilson 58.5, but we'll see a lot of single-digit scores here for the rest of your guys. Receivers: Corey Davis, Dontrell Inman, and Jeremy Maclin. Davis 5.5, Inman 7.5, Maclin 7.5. Lamar Miller, running back, he had a receiving touchdown, so he got you 12. McKinnon looks like 48 yards. Hunter Henry 2 for 25. Excuse me. Duke Johnson in the flex, 16.5. He had a touchdown there. I think he suffered an injury though at some point in that game. Not sure what it was, but McManus, your kicker, I think doesn't this happen every single year where Possum blows through all his transactions and everything, and ends up having to trade for a kicker at some point late in the season because he doesn't have one, which is ended up being part of the Elliott for Watson and a bunch of other stuff trade. You swapped kickers and got McManus for this week. You probably could have just gone with no kicker, and it wouldn't have made a difference. It would be interesting to see how often a matchup where maybe you had your kicker on bye and played for somebody else. If you had how many matchups would it actually change the outcome? How many matchups would have stayed the same in terms of outcome if you had just not played a kicker and taken the 0 there? If it would have changed the outcome, if you would have still won or lost and saved yourself a transaction or 2 there, trying to juggle kickers. That'd be interesting to see, because you got to think a kicker is going to score between 5 to 12. And say even just looking at this week, that 5 to 12 margin, only, let's say, the matchup that was 148 to 148 is really the only matchup that a kicker could have changed the outcome of. Everything else was, let's see, the other closest matchup was 18 points. There was a 30-pointer, 45 points there. So out of 6 matchups, only one could have been changed by a kicker's score there. So it'd be interesting to go back. It'd be too much work, I think, right now to go back and look over it and figure that out. But it'd be interesting to know just how many times, like I said, if you had just foregone picking up a kicker for a bye week and taken the 0, if that would have actually changed how many matchup outcomes that would have changed. So, but I'm getting away from the point here. And then finally, Minnesota defense for Possum Magic. Looks like they had a turnover, a couple sacks, gave up a low point total. Yahoo says 11. It was probably closer to 20, 25, something like that. They did pretty good. Excuse me. Again, sorry. But not enough. There said, as Possum Magic, you dropped to 4-7. You are in 9th place, but your point, much like the Isotopes and Wolf Bears, you are still holding on to a glimmer of playoff hope. Though it's not you're on the wrong side of that, I think, in terms of point totals there. Not looking good. Said Shawshank, you are 10-1, first place. I think did I say Possum? He's in 9th place now, and at 10-1, I think we've talked about this a little bit on the lineup. As far as I can tell, 11-2, I believe, is the best score that we've ever had. There's never been a 12-1 or 13-0. So Shawshank Athletics flirting with that total right now, could possibly break it. The 11-2. What did I think it's is it like 2008 or 2009 as far as we can go back to getting scores that are definitely correct and standings that are definitely correct. So, and I think I've gone back through those before already during the season, and 11-2 is the best that we've had. I think it was Jimmy, because I think he's talked about that a little bit on the Line app. That's one of his. I think that was the season that he had the 275 pointer, which is the highest single week score of all time. I think he was 11-2. I think it was Pyro that was 11-2 one year also. It was either him. Maybe it was Disco. It was either Pyro or Disco in the late 2000, like right around there, 2008 or 2009. But so Shawshank, will you be able to hold on and break that record? I mean, assuming it's the record, we'll have to wait and see. So those are the final the results for week 11. And now let's take a real quick, an hour and 8 minutes already. Let's see. Taking a quick look at week 12 and see if the matchups how they're going to affect these last couple playoff seeds, because the teams that are fighting for them are Disco, Bad Luck Bears, Isotopes, Wolf Bears, Possum, and Gags. Although, like I said, Possum and Gags are definitely on the wrong side of this one, because they are so their point totals, they're over 100 points behind both the Wolf Bears and the Isotopes and Disco, and also the Bad Luck Bears. So let's see, because for the Bad Luck Bears and Disco to make the playoffs, they need to at least go 1-1, if not 2-0 these last 2 weeks. So is that possible for Bad Luck Bears? I mean, let's see. Who does he play? It's a Huber matchup this week. Bad Luck versus Wolf Bears. Both of you need to win this one. So that'll be an interesting one to see. And then next week, Bad Luck Bears, you are playing Disco. So both of them tough matchups for the Bad Luck Bears, and both of you So both weeks, both teams need that game to you need to win. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. As for the 4-7 team, 4-7 teams, well, I should say Disco. So he needs to get at least one more win, probably two, just to feel safe. Like I said, he's got Jay next week. Who does he have this week? Disco has Gags this week, which is no pushover. Despite trading Kelsey, he's still got some stuff in his lineup that can take you out. I'm tired. I'm already tired of talking at this point. This is the most talking I do all week, probably more in this hour than the rest of the week combined. But anyway, so Disco's got Gags and then Jay. So that's going to be interesting to see what happens. The Isotopes, they have Space Antelope this week and Wolf Bears next week. So that all of the 4-7 teams have to win both games. And like I said, Wolf Bears are also 4-7. So next week, both teams, if the situation is still possible, both teams are going to have to win that game. It might be a battle for a playoff spot. Whoever wins that matchup should make it pretty interesting. But so it all depends on what happens this week here. Wolf Bears this week, the Hubers play each other. So that'll be interesting to see what happens. If the Wolf Bears can win, that would move them up to, let's see. He would probably, the Wolf Bears are still, let's see, about 50 or 60 points behind Jay. Jimmy's still 50, 60 points behind Jay. So even if Jimmy can win this week, he could possibly move up to 7th or maybe 6th, depending on what Disco does. Let's see. Because if Jay can win, so that would pretty much knock out Jimmy, because that would give him 8 losses. He would be pretty much done. And that would probably clinch a playoff spot for Jay, maybe. If Disco can win this week, that would make things very complicated for the Wolf Bears and the Isotopes, who are trying to sneak in that last playoff spot. Basically, what the Isotopes and Wolf Bears need to have happen is they both need to win these last 2 weeks and have Jay and Disco go either lose at least once. So to have a chance at the playoffs here, because both teams have higher point totals at least right now than Disco, but they're both a little bit behind the Bad Luck Bears. So if the Isotopes lose this week, they could be knocked out, and that would make next week's matchup versus the Wolf Bears irrelevant for them, but possibly fighting for a playoff spot for the Wolf Bears. So a lot of different things that could happen. The other matchups, Shawshank versus Laser Sharks, that's basically just fighting for pride. Laser Sharks in this one. FC Bahoric versus Possum Magic. Tough one there for Possum. FC Bahoric, he'd probably like to get a win or two, still trying to chase down Brian for one of those bye weeks. So there's only 2 games to go, and you're 2 games behind Brian. So for FC Bahoric, probably you have to probably safe to assume that you're not going to get a bye week. Even Space Antelope still has a better chance at squeaking one. Even if Brian would have to lose both of the last 2 weeks for either of you to overcome him. But he is way ahead. He's the overall point total leader. So even if FC Bahoric, even if you were to match his win total, I just don't think you're getting a bye. So you'd probably still be so far behind that even if you could get to 9-4 and Brian be 9-4, you're too far behind in overall points. As for Space Antelope, you basically need Brian to lose both of his matchups and you win one of both of yours. You have to get past him in wins, and even if you both end up, say, 11-2, well, you can't end up. Detlin can't end up 11-2. If he ends up 10-3, say they both end up 10-3, Detlin's team's 220 points behind Brian, so probably not going to change too much there in turn. It's unlikely that anyone besides Josh and Brian are going to get a bye week this year. So you're probably going to have to play with that in mind here these last 2 weeks there, Detling and Justin. And what are the other matchups? Midgets versus Hillbillies. So that's, again, another top versus bottom matchup. And Gags versus Disco. Gags looking to play spoiler and maybe give Disco a much more difficult chance to make the playoffs there. So that'll be an interesting matchup to watch. So really the only matchups that can affect the standings in a big way right now would be the Isotopes versus Antelope, as Antelope could eliminate the Isotopes. So the Huber versus Huber, both of you need to get that win. Whoever loses, so if Wolf Bears lose, they're probably done with 8 losses. And if the Bad Luck Bears lose, Jimmy still has a chance to make it next week. Okay. Shawshank Laser Sharks, that's top versus bottom. Mighty Midgets and PCP, top versus bottom. Gags versus Disco, so that one. So the Isotopes, the Wolf Bears, and Gags, those matchups are definitely going to have playoff implications there. Some people could be getting definitely knocked out, or getting still living on, fighting it for one more week, which is all that they're going to have after this week here. So, all right. Those 3 matchups, half of the matchups are going to be important. Half of them aren't going to matter a whole lot. Like I said, trying to think if Possum or Gags could really make it. Said Possum, you would need to win both of your matchups to get to 6 and 7, and you would need the Bad Luck Bears and Disco to both lose these last 2 weeks, I think. And I think I said that Jay and Disco play each other next week. So they are not... There's no chance that they're both going to win they're both going to lose these next 2 weeks here. Yeah. So that... So your point totals... Also, Gags... For you guys to still have a chance to make the playoffs, yeah. I said you would have to both win, either one of you to have it, to possibly squeak a spot. It would take, either one of you to win both of your matchups and have the Bears and Disco both lose both of their matchups. And since they're playing each other, that looks unlikely to happen. Just trying to think if you could take this number 6 seed. So if Jay could win this week over Disco, and then they play each other next week. If Disco won next week, that would put them both at 6 and 7. So, I don't know. All right. This is going on too long. Nobody, I'm sure you're like, just get it over with and stop. And it's a convoluted mess here, but it's going to shake itself out. Unfortunately, a couple of these matchups this week aren't really going to matter too much in terms of shuffling the standings here, but we got a couple that could potentially be some season ending for a couple of guys here. So it'll be, if you're still one of those teams chasing, it'll be fun to watch. If you're a couple of those teams who've already clinched, you can kind of sit back and just enjoy it. Enjoy the ride for these last 2 weeks and know that you are at least getting in. So I think for Detling and Justin, it would take a lot for you to get either one of you to somehow grab a bye week. So you can kind of, even if you drop to 5, I don't know that you could drop to the 5 or 6 seed. You're pretty much where you're at, going to be where you are. So don't get too bent out of shape over these last 2 weeks of your matchups, because whether you win or lose, it's not going to move you anywhere really. So that's too much. That's enough. Whew. All right, guys. This week said it's Thanksgiving week. We've got the big podcast coming up. Don't know who else is going to turn out. The annual Thanksgiving podcast tomorrow night. Got to figure out what we're going to do for that. Got to work on some material, see what's going to happen there to make it as entertaining as possible for everybody. So I said that, this week will be interesting. Some good matchups, and we'll see who is in. So who lives on for another week, and who else we might be clapping out going into the final week of the season already here. So, and it's been a good one, as it always is. But that's it for now. This is it for week 11. We'll see you all back here after week 12. Hopefully everyone has a good Thanksgiving, good holiday, good weekend, and we'll see you back here again next week. What's the Monday night game? It's something gross, like Ravens Texans, I think. Like, ugh. Does anyone even want to watch that game? Anyway, all right. Have a good holiday, good weekend, everything like I already said. Nobody breaks their legs at the Turkey Bowl. And we are back here next week to get ready for the final week of the season and ramping up for the playoffs here. All right, everyone, thanks for watching, and we'll see you back here again next week. Good luck to everyone.